How are you all doing, ladies and gentlemen? So we're here today with 5 of the cruelest rulers in history. Now, this is an interesting one because there is obviously tons of people in history that are cruel. But my question really is, what defines someone as a ruler? You know, is someone like that's in an unofficial position a ruler? I don't, I don't know. Now, when I think of who could be on this list, I don't know what cruel really is. Cruel to your enemies? Or is it more so like just barbaric? Because, like, I think in my list, you'd probably have Mao somewhere, um, Stalin somewhere. Because these were people that weren't just cruel to their enemies, but also, you know, their own citizen. Um, would you have Vlad the Impaler? Because he was kind of, you know, barbaric or not. How are you defining who's cruel? Is Adolf Hitler cruel? He really didn't punish his own people, quote unquote. But obviously he did atrocities to others. Is that someone that's cruel, or um, is there, doing cruel things to your own? Basically, that would be my definition. Being cruel is doing cruel things to your own people. So people such as Stalin, Mao, Vlad the Impaler, sort of. And that's kind of where I run out of ideas who could be cruel, you know, truly, truly cruel. So there have been plenty. Again, what is a ruler? You know, we have Lenin in there. I don't know. You know, so you have to answer questions. You have to ask questions like that as well. Some may say, you know, you'd have Putin in there, which I can kind of see, but not really. And then again, what is a ruler? So we're just gonna hop right into this and see. Maybe to give a definition at the beginning, then I can, like, you know, accurately form an opinion on who should be on that list or not. I don't know. But let's see what this video has in store for us, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bit long, so let's not talk too long.
When examining history for cruel leaders, there are no shortage of candidates. The old adage that absolute power corrupts absolutely seems to ring true, and history has time and again shown that human beings are capable of the most terrible acts in their pursuit of power, wealth, and fame. While it may be true that one man's hero is another man's tyrant, here are 5 leaders who undoubtedly showed extreme cruelty when they held power over their fellow man.
Okay, that fellow.
Pol Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia between 1963 and 1997, and became the ruler of Cambodia in 1975 when his forces captured the capital.
Never heard of
He
him.
held absolute power, and his reign as a totalitarian dictator was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 1 to 3 million people, which amounted to about 1/4 of the Cambodian population at that time. His primary goal as leader of Cambodia was to build his vision of a socialist utopia, and
That's hardcore. Half the that is that okay. That is extreme. Extreme.
soon after taking power, his government began evacuating cities and moving their inhabitants to the countryside, where they would be put to work on collective farms and forced labour projects. He also implemented a concept known as Year Zero, which essentially meant destroying all past culture and traditions and starting again from scratch.
Why?
Cambodia's past would be erased, and history would begin again, moulded by Pol Pot's hands. The Cambodian people were arranged into 3 groups called the base people, candidates, and depositees. The base people and the candidates were mainly those who were uneducated peasant farm workers or original members of the Khmer Rouge, and might earn full rights in the new Cambodia. The depositees largely consisted of the urban population, which had been transported from the cities to the countryside. The depositees had no place in Pol Pot's socialist utopia and were to be eliminated. Their rations were reduced to just 2 bowls of rice soup per day, and starvation soon set in. Anyone tainted by capitalism was classified as the enemy, and teachers, lawyers, and doctors, along with anyone with an education, were subject to arrest, torture, and execution. Even simply wearing glasses, having soft hands, or being able to speak a foreign language would mark you for death.
I had to think about for a second why soft hand, but obviously that implies that you haven't worked a day, you haven't worked in your life. That's basically the stereotype, that if you have soft hands. Not a stereotype, it's sort of true, but obviously we're just talking about manual labour here. This is just stupid. This is just when you can tell that someone that's already insane somehow gets into power. That's all that's happening here.
Hundreds of thousands of people would be shackled and led into fields, where they would be forced to dig their own mass graves. Often these people would be buried alive, tortured, or simply beaten to death as bullets were seen as too valuable to waste. These mass graves have since become known as the killing fields, and the bones of the victims of this genocide are still on display at memorial sites across Cambodia. The regime's philosophy was made clear in a chilling broadcast made over the state-controlled radio. The broadcast stated that only 1 or 2 million people would be needed to build the new utopia, and the message for the others was, quote, "To keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss." Hundreds of thousands died from starvation, disease, and execution. All religion was banned, and minority ethnic groups suffered severe persecution. Food sources that were difficult to centralise, store, and control were destroyed, and even fishing was outlawed. Hospitals and medicine were abolished, and all property was seized and became collectively owned.
What I don't understand, right, and that's actually my issue with a lot of things, right? If you know your leader is batshit insane, which clearly is, if you know your leader is a batshit insane, why would you, as the military, I know it's your boss, so on and so forth, you work for your country, but why would you, as your military, not rebel? That would be the moment I'd be like, no, screw you, we're going against you. If you know somebody is batshit insane like that, because the military folks, they must have had plenty of family members, so on and so forth, that might have been victims here, so they should have rebelled right away.
Pol Pot's nightmarish reign of terror eventually came to an end after intervention from neighbouring Vietnam. After years of escalating tension between the two countries, war broke out and the Cambodian army was defeated in 1979.
Good.
Vietnam installed a new government, and Pol Pot fled to the border region between Thailand and Cambodia, where he continued to wage a guerrilla war with those forces who had stayed loyal to him. He eventually died in 1998, supposedly of a heart failure, although there were rumours that he took his own life when he realised that he was to face trial for his crimes.
Okay.
Number 4. Timur the Great. Also known as Tamerlane, the name Timur means iron, and gives a hint at the character of the man. Timur was the founder of the giant Timurid Empire, which encompassed much of Central Asia and the Middle East. Much of his lifetime was spent at war, and he campaigned everywhere from southern Russia to Turkey and even India, and he seemed obsessed with the idea of restoring the great Mongol Empire forged by Genghis Khan.
I heard of him. I can't remember the whole time. While he was saying his name, I've heard of his name, but I can't place it. So
his military campaigns were particularly bloody, even by the standard of his day, and are thought to have caused the death of up to 17 million people, which was 5% of the world's population at that time. Like the Mongols before him, Timur was particularly cruel and ruthless to those who would dare defy him. During his conquest of Persia, the city of Herat refused to surrender to his armies. His response was swift and merciless. The city was completely destroyed, and most of its inhabitants were massacred. However, more creative punishments would be used for the already conquered who would dare to rebel. In 1385, the conquered city of Esfazar revolted while Timur was campaigning in Georgia. The rebellious town was quickly recaptured, and the survivors of the attack are said to have been cemented into the walls of the city. A grisly fate also awaited the rebellious city of Isfahan, which revolted and killed Timur's tax collectors. The city's 200,000 inhabitants were massacred, and great towers were built out of the heads of the slain.
This is how you this right here, a mountain of skulls, is how you instill fear into people. This right here.
100,000 Hindu captives were also beheaded after the capture of Delhi. 60,000 people were enslaved in Armenia and Georgia, and 90,000 people were killed in Baghdad, where severed heads were arranged into giant pyramids. Such massacres occurred all over Timur's empire, and he seemed to have a liking for constructing giant pyramids or towers from the heads of his enemies. However, this cruel behaviour was not without logic. These tactics of terror seem to have been part of Timur's overall strategy and were very effective at discouraging resistance,
of course,
and possibly even preventing further bloodshed.
Of course.
Many towns and cities would simply surrender without a fight for fear of Timur's cruel reputation.
That makes sense.
Conquered territories were unlikely to revolt once they learned the fate of previous rebels. Timur finally died in 1405 while invading China, and in a final twist to his legacy, his casket was inscribed with the words, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." 3 days after his casket was opened by archaeologists, Adolf Hitler began his invasion of the Soviet Union, and shortly after Timur's remains were reburied, the Germans were defeated at Stalingrad.
Alright. That's one of those things in history, right? There's plenty of those. You can I probably should do like a video that's titled like biggest coincidences in history ever, because it's like a ton of coincidence, which I think like the law, what's it called, the law of there's a phrase, a specific phrase that I'm thinking of where like coincidences are linked. I can't remember what it is, what the phrase is called right now. I think it's like the law of not causality. It's similar though. It's similar though. Not principality. It's like a mix. It's like causality, principality, something like the totality. No, it's like a word, like something that's like coincident. Two coincidences that happen at the same time are definitely linked somehow. There's a word that describes that, but yeah, there's plenty of these kind of coincidences in history.
Number 3. Queen Ranavalona I of Madagascar. Ranavalona I ruled the Kingdom of Madagascar from 1828 to 1861 and has left behind a legacy as cruel and brutal as any male leader in history. Throughout her reign, she was focused on keeping colonial powers out of Madagascar, making her country as self-sufficient and isolated from the outside world as she could. In her efforts to strengthen Madagascar so that the kingdom could withstand European attack, she made heavy use of forced labour as a tax payment, using this labour to complete public works projects, as well as to build a standing army of 30,000 men. A new army was immediately put to use expanding her kingdom,
That's
as well
pretty
as
good.
crushing opposition to her rule. The continuous warfare and high level of brutal forced labour skyrocketed the mortality rate amongst soldiers and civilians.
You think of it, 30,000. Nowadays that sounds like it sounds like quite a bit, but it doesn't sound like that much. There are companies out there in this world today that have more than 30,000 employees, alright? But like back then, that would like be one of the big armies, and it's just we've come a long way. If you look at everything, we've come a very, very long way from the good old days, the quote unquote good old days. We've come quite a long way.
And it's estimated that the population of Madagascar declined from around 5 million to 2.5 million between 1833 and 1839. As part of her efforts to curtail British and French influence within her realm, she banned the practice of Christianity amongst her people and banished most foreigners from her kingdom. Treaties and trade relationships with outside powers were ended, and anyone who disobeyed her commands could expect harsh punishments.
Great.
Mass executions were common, and slavery was rife, with over 1 million people thought to have been enslaved on the island during her reign. Simply being found with a Bible in your possession could result in being jailed, tortured, or even executed, and one infamous account reveals how 15 Christian leaders were publicly executed by being dropped 150 feet into a rock-filled ravine after refusing to renounce their faith. Perhaps the strangest aspect of her reign was the mass use of the traditional practice of trial by tangina. This involved extracting a poison from a local shrub, which would then be eaten along with 3 pieces of chicken skin by someone who was accused of a crime. If all 3 pieces of the chicken skin were vomited up, then the accused was declared innocent. Death from the poison or failure to vomit the 3 pieces of chicken skin indicated guilt. Somewhere between 20% and 50% of those who took part in this ordeal would die from the poison.
20%? Okay. 50%? Okay. Of the poison, but what about...
And with the practice being applied at the mere accusation of a crime, death from this strange ritual soared.
Great. That's why I'd much rather prefer trial by combat.
In the 1820s, an average of 1,000 people were poisoned to death every year through this ritual. However, that number rose to an average of around 3,000 per year during Queen Ranavalona I's reign, and it's thought to have hit a staggering 100,000 deaths in 1838. Although the Queen succeeded in keeping Europeans out of Madagascar, her people paid a terrible price.
Yeah.
Number 2. King Leopold II of Belgium.
Sometimes you just gotta wonder.
He was the second king of the Belgians and reigned for 44 years until his death in 1909,
Is it worth
making
it?
him the longest reigning Belgian monarch. Although his rule within Belgium was somewhat uneventful, he is infamous for founding the Congo Free State in Africa, which he brutally exploited as his own personal colony. His quest for personal riches led him to establish the Congo Free State under the guise of wanting to bring Christianity, Western civilization, and commerce to the natives. He hired the explorer Henry Morton Stanley to establish his new colony, and the explorer spent 5 years setting up trading posts and persuading local tribal chiefs to sign treaties with the Belgian king.
Okay.
Many of these treaties were subsequently doctored by Leopold, and many of the chiefs who signed the treaties were illiterate and unaware what they were agreeing to. On
Great.
the 5th of February 1885, the Congo Free State was established, which encompassed an enormous area 76 times larger than Belgium. It soon became apparent that the king had little interest in enriching the lives of the native people, and was more focused on obtaining great wealth for himself.
Yeah.
Using his own private mercenary force, he began extracting huge amounts of wealth from his new colony. He started by collecting and exporting ivory. However, in the 1890s, rubber became a resource that was in high demand, and the price of rubber rose rapidly. His focus quickly shifted to collecting sap from rubber plants. However, this process was extremely labour-intensive. To solve this problem, native peoples began being used as forced labour to harvest and process the precious rubber. His 19,000-man strong private army would take a village's women hostage, forcing the men to gather and bring back a quota of rubber.
So much for treaties, eh? So much for peaceful treaties, eh?
The quotas were high, and the men had to hunt far and wide to obtain enough rubber to meet their quota and thus free their women. Failing to meet a quota was punishable with beatings, mutilation, and even death. Such forced labour became widespread, and thousands of men were worked to death. Thousands more fled their villages to escape being used as forced labourers, only to starve in the surrounding forests due to a lack of food. Many more died in failed uprisings against their new overlord, and the king's mercenary soldiers were required to produce a severed hand for every bullet they used, so as to prove that their bullets had been used to kill rebels, instead of being used for hunting food. If a soldier fired a shot and missed, he would still need to present a hand to his officer, which often resulted in living victims having their hands chopped off. This huge level of forced labour had a devastating side effect. With most able-bodied adults put to work generating wealth for the king, few people were left to hunt for food and tend to crops. This left millions of people near starvation, and disease spread like wildfire amongst the weakened population.
As it always
With
does.
so many men separated from their wives, the birth rate plummeted, which, combined with the killing, starvation and disease, is thought to have resulted in the population of the Congo Free State dropping by up to 50%, from around 20 million to 10 million between 1880 and 1920.
50%. That's a lot. That's a big drop. That's a massive drop. Just for comparison's sake, I believe the UK has, I want to say, 65 million people. I might be off here, but I think it's like around. I think last time I checked, it was 40, but that was like a few years ago. That was like 10, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, give or take. So I think as of right now, it's probably at like 60, 65, 70, that around that much, right? So that's like the equivalent of like 35 million on obviously the high end dying. You know, if it's 70 million, that's a lot of people.
King Leopold managed to contain criticism of his private colony for several years. However, the results of such widespread suffering and death eventually led to an international outcry, and the king was forced to hand over control of his colony to the Belgian government in 1908. Number 1. Idi Amin. Idi Amin Dada was the third.
Should have figured. The second they said his name, I was like, yeah, of course. It should have been on my list as well.
President of Uganda, and ruled from 1971 through to 1979. He first showed his brutal side while serving in the British colonial army, and became known for using torture during interrogations, as well as killing people whom he had been ordered to arrest. Despite showing such callous brutality, or perhaps even because of this dark side, he rose quickly through the ranks, and upon Uganda receiving independence from the British, became a captain and then a major. By 1970, he was commander of all of the armed forces. However, his relationship with the Ugandan Prime Minister soon fell apart, and upon discovering that the Prime Minister was planning his arrest on corruption charges, Amin seized power in a military coup in 1971. Soon after seizing power, Idi Amin unleashed a campaign of terror against his own people that resulted in the deaths of an estimated 500,000 Ugandans. He cracked down on all opposition, both real and imagined, tortured and killed people without trial, and persecuted opposing ethnic groups. In the purges that would follow, religious leaders, journalists, rival tribes, foreign nationals and students all fell victim to his death squads. The bodies of his victims would be thrown into the River Nile and were continuously being fished out at a nearby dam to prevent the intake ducts from becoming clogged. He created his own intelligence agency called the SRB, the headquarters of which would become home to some of the worst human rights abuses, including torture and execution.
You see, I'll be honest, right? I'll be totally honest here. I'm kind of a messed up person, right? Like I would have absolutely no issues At least that's what I keep telling myself. But just hear me out for now, right? Before you click dislike and whatnot, I would absolutely have like no issues committing murder if it meant I could, if it meant if it was for a right cause, alright? I'd be like, okay, the ends justify the means. But what kind of means I justified it, right? Like, to me, first of all, why torture? That's one thing. Just be done with it, I guess. But then, second of all, why? Just why? I wouldn't say I'm a pacifist. I'm like a pacifist that would hurt people. So I'm not really a pacifist. It's kind of contradictory. Like, I'm like the nicest person I'll ever meet. But if I was like in a situation where it's like, okay, I have to, I guess at the end of the day, I'm a utilitarianist as well. If it boils down to, okay, I have to kill 40% of all of humanity to save 60%, I would do it in a heartbeat. I'd do it in a second. But like in general, I'm like, okay, I'm not a violent person. But I don't understand, right? I don't understand, right?
It was here that political prisoners would be taken, and there are accounts that many people held here were forced to beat each other to death with sledgehammers, with the false belief that victory in these twisted fights might earn them a quick death. Over time, his behaviour became increasingly eccentric, and wild rumours began circulating. There were reports that he began keeping the heads of his enemies in a freezer, taking them out occasionally to have lengthy conversations with them, and there were even reports that he began indulging in cannibalism. In August 1972, Amin launched his so-called economic war, which was a set of policies aimed at Asians and Europeans living in Uganda. Over 80,000 people of Asian and European ethnicity, most of whom were born in Uganda, had their properties and businesses seized and were expelled from the country. Their businesses were then handed over to Amin's supporters.
One thing is clear: he couldn't have killed him. If he did, he would have gotten destroyed in a heartbeat. So that's why we'll take out all your stuff and let you go. That it's clear why.
However, this proved to be a disaster for the Ugandan economy. The businesses were poorly managed, and many subsequently collapsed, causing enormous hardship for the already suffering Ugandan people. Idi Amin's downfall began in 1978, when he invaded neighbouring Tanzania. By 1979 he was losing the war, and when the Tanzanian army, backed by Ugandan exiles, invaded Uganda, Amin was forced to flee into exile, where he eventually settled in Saudi Arabia before dying in 2003. So there are my choices for 5 of history's cruelest rulers. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and who you would have included in this list and why. And I'll see.
This list is kind of difficult. I'll be honest, this list is severely difficult to actually make. First of all, I don't know each ruler in history, and clearly this one went more of like a percentage-based thing, which is absolutely fine. Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't necessarily agree with any of the people on the list. It's always difficult, it's always difficult to like think of like who are the 5 most cruelest people in history, because there are so many different variables that one could take. Is killing your own people cruel? Or is it, is that what makes you cruel, or is it, or is you going against other countries? Is that cruel? Because at the end of the day, every country at least, has been at war at one point. So you could say every country's leader has been cruel in the past. But no, I largely agree with this list. Obviously, again, I mentioned a few people that I would have thought of, but there is a lot. This is a lot more historic. There's a lot more people that are severely older, and that worked out. Not that worked out, but like that were cruel at their time, for their time. Well, still even to this day, they would be considered cruel. So yeah, I can't really disagree with this list. I'll be seeing you all in the next one, everyone. Until then, have a nice day. Peace out, and bye.